All right, so this is looking at COVID-19 in animal welfare. The big thing with this that is kind of coming out is that we need to look at changing our focus from the animals to people. And not necessarily to the public, but actually to us, to the people in our shelters, our staff, our volunteers. I'm in Treaty 6 territory here in Saskatoon, which is also the homeland of the Métis people, so we do want to have a land acknowledgement there. A little bit about me. I started in small animal medicine about 20 years ago in the early 2000s in a practice down in Kansas where you could do all sorts of fun and exciting things as a tech without being a tech. We did primarily small animal. With that, there was a certain amount of exotics, and then our vet also had a bit of a passion for equine. So we did a lot of that. I've bounced around the thoroughbred racetracks here in Canada. And then I've been at the Saskatoon SPCA now for 10 and a half years, at Arlington for 8, and at Sask Polytech for the last year and a half. Started teaching in the vet tech program there. So the three kind of big things we need to look at are the overviews for COVID-19 for people, the overviews for COVID-19 in animals, both direct and indirect, and then looking at what we need to change for right now and looking at what we should consider changing for in the future. Basic overview of our symptoms here for COVID-19. It's a respiratory illness. Coronaviruses are fairly common in people as well as in animals. If anybody remembers that, if you've had the unfortunate encounter with feline infectious peritonitis, or FIP, it's a modified or mutated coronavirus that happens in cats. It has a variety of symptoms in people, some of which are pretty common, some of which are a little bit more exotic. The big thing is that it affects humans. This particular one affects humans the most. The next species that seems to be affected the most are ferrets. They seem to be incredibly susceptible to it, followed by cats, followed by dogs. Infection in animals does happen. The big thing is to not overinterpret it. People get really, really focused on the fact that their cat could get it or their dog could get it. As we look into that a little bit later, it's not the biggest concern right now. The biggest concern is it actually in our human population, in our staff, in our volunteers, in our adopters, our visitors. So does it occur in animals? Yes. Should we be concerned? Not really. The number of animals that have been infected are infected by humans. They're infected by close contact with humans who already have the virus. If you think about it logically, that makes sense. My cats don't leave my house, so they're not going to go out and get COVID-19. My dogs do, but they're always with me. They're not out running of their own volition through Saskatoon. So if they do happen to get sick, they're going to get sick from me. The biggest way that this is actually going to affect our pets is if caregivers are affected. So if caregivers are in the hospital, if they die, if you need to isolate, if you become sick, officially you are actually supposed to isolate from your pets within your home, which is not necessarily realistic. It wouldn't happen in my home. It's unlikely to happen in yours. You know, my household is 2 humans and 4 animals. It's very unlikely we could actually isolate ourselves from each other realistically. There are some secondary effects that we run into. With that, we're looking at socialization issues. It's coming to the forefront that corona puppies and corona kittens are a thing. Everybody who wanted to foster at the beginning when they were at home and bored. There are so many out there. Anecdotally, the dogs and puppies that we're seeing on Kijiji are at a much higher value monetarily than what they were previously, just because demand is so high. So the dog that somebody could happily sell for $100 or give away for 50 is several $100s. The concern, especially here in Saskatoon, is that come fall, we're going to have this massive influx of these 8 to 10 month old under-socialized, under-trained animals coming in that we now have to try and do some rehab work, try and adopt out. At the moment, we're just putting that on the back burner, knowing that it's coming. There is unfortunately not a lot that we can do to prepare for that. That's something that offering training classes and offering online help, some of the shelters across Canada are starting to look at that, but there are limitations. Edmonton has started to run some. There's a couple of private trainers here in Saskatoon that have started. But even when I go out to walk my dogs, nobody actually walks up and pets them. Everyone kind of waves from a distance and goes, "Oh, aren't they cute?" But nobody actually comes up to interact with them. So if you are trying to work with the dog, that's going to be just about impossible. Changes in routine. We definitely know some interesting things with our pets at home. We discovered that one of the cats really enjoys sleeping on the dog bed when the dogs are in their crates when we're away at home, and he was very put out that suddenly the dogs were allowed out all the time. We've definitely noticed some differences in the pets just with the amount of interaction they want from us, the amount of interaction they don't want from us. That's going to change as people do go back to work. As jobs change, as people don't go back to the same job, that's something to definitely be concerned about and have in the background. Lastly, actual illness for pets. It is unlikely most of the animals that are actually becoming symptomatic with COVID-19 are recovering nicely, which is good. But just like in people, there's no treatment for it. It's just supportive care. There is testing for it through IDEX. You can do a PCR test. It is very restricted in that they are requiring you to have ruled out all the other potential possibilities, and there has to be a logical reason for it. The pet basically has to come from a home where they've had a contact with someone who's actually sick. They're not just allowing people to have any pet tested, which doesn't make sense. Our big concerns here is transmission. Direct transmission is the most common form of transmission. It's a factor of volume and of time. So if you look at our little person here coughing away with his lovely respiratory droplets, if you're standing really close to him, you get a huge volume. If you're standing really close to him for a short period of time, you get a huge volume. If you're there for a long time, you get an even bigger volume. So the way we mitigate this is our distance. Spreading people apart reduces the actual volume of virus that you are going to get. The more virus you're exposed to, the more likely you are to become sick. The other way we can limit transmission is masks, basically covering any hole to your body so what you have doesn't come out, and what other people have we can hopefully limit from coming in. And then hygiene, which is washing. We're very lucky in that COVID is very susceptible to things like soap and water. We can actually wash it away, and it is susceptible to most disinfectants. Even the old quaternary compounds that I don't think you can order anymore, they are still quite effective, which is nice. Our indirect transmission is really what we're looking at for fomites. So with this, it's anything that you come into contact with that has virus on it. Packages, pens, cell phones. Good heavens, when was the last time anybody wiped their cell phone down? I definitely don't nearly enough. Pets are not technically a fomite because it needs to be an inanimate object. The problem is that their fur becomes a fomite, right? You cough and sneeze all over your pet, and then they walk up and cuddle all over you and get all up in your face. So even that's why the asterisk is there, is pets can't officially be a fomite, but they actually act like them. That is one of the bigger concerns on the east, so out in Ontario. One of their big concerns is people surrendering pets and bringing pets in, and pets actually carrying virus in with them. We are lucky in Saskatchewan in that we live in a landlocked province that has a low population. We don't see the numbers that other areas do, but it is something that we can't just ignore and hope we luck out for, the rest of this pandemic. Overall, our PPE, things that we know about in shelter medicine and in shelter practice that has suddenly become like buzzwords for everybody. Masks, so once again, covering all those holes to the body. Gloves, and then gowns and face masks. Really, gloves, unfortunately tend to give people a false sense of security. They touch stuff with their gloves and then they touch their face with their filthy, filthy gloves, which is really just gross. It's better to just wash with soap and water and have your hands nice and clean. Masks, N95s, for our use, not really necessary. Surgical masks, you know, they'll work slightly better than the cloth masks, but there is still a concern as of the middle of June for there to be supply chain issues. It has bounced back a little bit, but if things keep going the way they are kind of globally with countries that have less control over their pandemic, spikes in that supply chain demand will happen. So having those saved for actual needs are good. If you think about it on the veterinary side of things, even for what's considered a fast and relatively routine procedure like a spay or a neuter, they're saying that a cloth homemade mask is fine. They want to save the surgical masks for things like orthopedics, things where if we get infection, it's going to be really, really bad. Full gowns, face masks, for most regular situations, not really needed. Making sure that things are laundered and cared for, making sure that lab coats get washed, that scrubs get washed, that's more effective than trying to have everybody in full gowns and face shields and that sort of thing. It it's also, it's Saskatchewan in the summertime. Everybody's gonna be roasting if we're in full length gowns. It's more about keeping our average daily use stuff nice and clean and keeping the medical stuff set aside for the medical needs. There is a proper way to wear a mask, and it is a personal pet peeve of mine when I see people with the mask under the nose, or the mask like hanging, or the masks hanging from the from rearview mirrors. That drives me nuts. The big thing is putting it on, getting it set, leaving it alone, and not touching it. It's super hard. I wear glasses, they fog up. I get it. It's just one of those things. But it's putting it on, leaving it on, not pulling it down, talking, putting it back up, pulling it down, talking, putting it back up. The more you touch the mask, the dirtier it becomes. The more dirt to it, the more moisture to it, the less effective it becomes, which we don't want. Same thing when you take it off, taking it off and chucking it in the wash. At the moment, I've got 4 masks that I rotate through. So there's one for every day, and usually by day 4, I've got enough of laundry to do a load and I have a clean one. My husband doesn't leave the house much. He is a higher risk category, so he just has the one and he wears it, and then I chuck it in the wash and it's ready to go for the next time he actually has to go out. The big thing is you're supposed to wash your hands before you put it on. You're supposed to wash your hands when you take it off. You don't want to have whatever you've picked up while you're out in the public or been spoken moistly on by someone else. You don't want to grab that and put it on your hands, then rub your eye and you know, or stick it in your nose, because that's not going to work. As much as everyone was grossed out by that phrase, it is so descriptive and it's so accurate. I love it because it makes people think that, yeah, we do speak kind of grossly, like, ugh. From our end of things, we need to be looking at the people we're coming into contact with. We're coming into contact with donors, people who are coming in, they want to drop off donations, they're bored at home, they've cleaned something out, they want to say thank you because you're open and you're helping all the lovely, cute and fuzzy animals. If you work with other agencies, animal control, veterinary clinics, adopters, even if they are going into a satellite location or a foster location, and volunteers, I mean, we know they make shelters go round. In Saskatoon, we cut back our volunteers a ton just for numbers, and we're just starting to pick back up. But when you think about all those people you come into contact on a daily basis, the pool of contacts becomes really big. The other thing to consider is our personal life. A lot of what was happening here in Saskatoon was people were saying, oh, well, I only work with Jenny, so we work together, that's fine. But they forget that they go to the grocery store. I actually had to go to the bank once, which was a royal pain in the butt. You've got people in your immediate family, they go out. We are now getting actually to use social spaces. With the nice weather, everybody's out and walking. So that tree of people you come into contact with isn't just you and Jenny who you work with, it's her spouse and then his best friend and then the guy he works with, and it just becomes a really, really, really big pool. The reason this is actually concerning and a problem is that even though we are reopening and in stage 4.2 or whatever we're in now, mandatory isolation is still required if you have close contact to somebody who's confirmed. The problem with that is that if you have a staff member who actually tests positive, it's likely everyone's going to have to isolate. And that means staying at home. Can you realistically take everyone in your office or your building or organization right now today and turf them out the door for 2 weeks? It's not possible. We've been super lucky, but it's not possible. So it is something that I know the veterinary clinics are getting lots of kickback and frustration from their clients because they're still doing curbside pickup. They're still not allowed to come in. They're still limiting stuff that isn't urgent. The problem is this. At the clinic here in Saskatoon, we split up our staff so that we have 2 teams that don't overlap. The reason being, if one team does get knocked out, we don't close our doors. For any business that's a small business to get shut down for 2 weeks is going to be hard. We can't do, takeout food. We can't do takeout medicine. We have to figure something out. So the big thing is to actually looking at enforcing distance, having barriers, wearing masks, requesting other people wear masks, and for the heaven's sake, washing everything. Surfaces are supposed to be washed at least twice a day or as soiled. That also doesn't mean first thing in the morning and last thing at night. That isn't twice a day. That's essentially once. So it means, first thing in the morning and middle of the day, or last thing at night, middle of the day, and then as needed. I mean, things get gross. We wash them all the time, but pens and phones and countertops and keyboards and mouses and all that stuff, it becomes a bit of a drag when it's every day. It is very hard to do, but it is something that we need to keep this in mind. A couple days ago, Tampa Bay's Humane Society had to close their clinic for 2 weeks due to COVID-19 concerns, which basically means they had a positive test with somebody and they have to close the entire thing down. The shelter itself isn't closed, which is good, but this is their medical clinic. And they have it operates open to the public, so they do have to send people elsewhere. So Florida is its own little world of doing whatever they want to do, but it's not that it doesn't happen, it's not that it can't happen. So what do we need to look at changing for right now? The big thing is looking at, does it actually need face-to-face contact? And some of the resources that I list at the end, they actually have a walkthrough of, okay, you have an older population of donors or adopters or whatever. Can you actually get on the phone and walk them through your website, walk them through your electronic forms so that they can do that? Can we do anything online? Can we do Zoom? Can we do Skype? Can we do FaceTime? Can we do as much until that very last moment of somebody having to come in the door from a distance? People will adapt. They don't have a choice. We have the best excuse ever, which is it's a global pandemic. They don't really have an option. They don't like it. They're cranky. They're annoyed. I get it. But they can adapt. They can, we all figured out Zoom in 2 weeks type of idea. Having that sort of walking people through things online, even if you have somebody in office manning the phones, but still having them, do that form filling out. Anything that can happen not inside is great. It's super nice out today in Saskatoon, which is even better. So we don't have winter and we're just going to ignore that until winter happens. But out, having that conversation outside the door, having that conversation at curbside, having that meet and greet outdoors, having that adoption outdoors, what can we do outside without having to have people inside in a close proximity? The big thing to look at is priorities versus risk. Having a nice, happy donor base is important. That's where we get our support, our funds, our fosters, all that stuff. The problem is that the things that benefit them the most, but don't necessarily benefit us the most, become a low priority because they're higher risk. One of the, looking at the communities that do TNR, they need to evaluate whether that's going to really set them back, whether they can have access to those vets. In-house programs, things like read a book to a dog and that sort of thing have gone right out the window. Those are the last things to come back in. But really looking at the risk and considering, if we shut everything down, like, is this risk worth it? Actually having health evaluations for your staff, for your visitors, they're up outside of every business that I go into, where it says, stop, have you been to, you know, out of country? Do you have a cough? Do you have a fever? All that fun stuff. They are valid things to keep reminding people, because it does become a bit of a background noise in that we stop listening to it, we stop reading it. But it is something that for the school, I have to fill out a form every 2 weeks saying that I don't have any of the following symptoms. I know what to do if I do have them. We require it of the students on a daily basis. It is something to consider that, you know, it's hard when every second phone call is, did you go outside of the province of Saskatchewan? Have you been anywhere that's had an outbreak? But if we can catch people before they come in, when they say, I have a sore throat, it's probably not COVID-19, but let's try and be careful. One of the things with this to look forward is what are we going to change going forward? We do have kind of a nice blank slate that we can work with. One of the things that we've noticed in Saskatoon is that we've done everything by appointment, and the staff really like it. All the adoptions are by appointment, all the redemptions from the pound are by the appointment. We can fit people in if they show up and they're at the door, but there's a lot less disruption to work. There's a lot less disruption to all the different departments that are involved, because we have a scheduled day ahead of us, or as scheduled as we can make it. The staff are really leaning towards keeping that post-COVID, just to stop kind of the petting zoo mentality of let's go to the shelter and wander through. One of the things also anecdotally is we have had almost no diarrhea in our cats this summer, which several of our staff members attribute to not having hordes of people wandering through and just stressing them out. It is super hard because those impulse adoptions are super important, especially for cats, because they're cats. There's a million of them out there. But you know, if we're perpetually having to deal with cats on medication and cats needing to see the vet and surgeries are postponed, that's something that we do need to look at. So we're not entirely certain how we're going to do that for flow through for public coming through. Christopher, you're totally insane. So you might as well wander through. My husband's trying to leave the house. So that's something that we really need to evaluate going forward. These are kind of the top 4 resources. The Ontario Shelter Medicine has a whole toolkit, which is multiple documents. They have a standard PowerPoint that you can give to staff. They have a script for it. They have basically every scenario covered, and it's updated about every week or two with what's going on from a public health perspective, where things are. It is Ontario, so they are much stricter than we are as far as a few things that are required. But they also have the recovery toolkit for where to go forward from here. Humane Canada has a nice pool of sites that they've put together, including some funding opportunities through PetSmart charities and that sort of thing. That might be a good option. The wage subsidies and stuff like that, as we're starting to reach the end of those, we are somewhat limited, but Humane Canada is trying to keep on top of that for everybody. That is it from me. If we want to open the floor to questions, I will stop screen sharing here.
Does anyone have any questions for Meaghan? No questions? Shane's got one.
Need to
One
unmute.
question. How do you deal with people, like when you do have them in there? How much do you have at a time? Like, are you limiting how many people you have at a time?
We are lucky in that we have both of our front reception room, and then there is a separate it's called our auditorium. It's just a big multi-purpose room. But we are funneling people into there so that if somebody's in and actually needs to go through the steps of an adoption or something like that, or they're actually doing a physical meet and greet and it's pouring rain outside, we have this big empty room that we can stick them in. But we are pretty much limiting it to 1 to 2 households. And if it is, if there's 3 people, one person is at the counter, the other 2 go sit down. Like those 2 chairs, go sit there. And it is, the other day I think there were 4 people in the front office, and it was like, oh my God, there's people everywhere. Whereas in the past, it's just been complete chaos. But it has, and the front door has been locked, and it stayed that way because people just like wander in all the time, especially as soon as school was kind of out. People wandered in all the time. So the door is locked, and then somebody actually has to go and let them in, and then we can kind of restrict traffic flow that way. But yeah, it is, we have two staff members and then 1 to 2 other people, but we do try and space everything out and spread everybody out as much as we can.
Yeah, because like sometimes I'm by myself, and because there's only a few of us that are staffed here.
Mm-hmm.
So like say if I have like 3 people in here, I'm dealing with someone, and then the issue I'm having is someone leaving the door open, and then I have a bunch of other people coming in.
Then you just have the horde that wanders in after them. Yeah,
So
and
just
it
like 1 to
is.
2 households at a time. You seen
It
that
is.
working?
It is. It's working a little bit. It is hard, and we had to do the same thing that I've seen at like my chiropractor has chairs in front of their desk, so you can't actually get up to the desk, but we've had to put tables in front of the counter to like keep people back, and then markers on the floor and all that fun stuff, and people still do whatever the heck they want. But it is trying to police that traffic. People are getting a little lax, unfortunately. It's hard, but yeah, it's trying. I mean, it's as much signage and as much polite customer service of, can you please wait outside? Please go to your car and I'll call you when I'm ready. I know it's yeah, people do get frustrated and wander in front of somebody else, and it is, yeah, it's hit and miss with how cooperative people are, and when they leave too, if we say, please make sure you close the door behind you, it's hit and miss. It's all over the place. Yeah.
Well, that's good advice. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. The big thing is that, everyone, if you've dealt in the shelter, you've dealt with some sort of quarantine of some sort, right? You've had a sick animal come in, you have no idea what's wrong with them, or we think it's parvo or whatever. The problem with that is that's from that point going forward, right? Everyone who came into contact with this dog on this day, we have this 2-week window afterwards. The problem with the incubation for COVID and with people is that it's everything going backwards, right? It's not who I came into contact with today, it's who I came into contact with a week ago. And even though, me and 2 other people have all worked together for the last however many months, if we get 1 positive test, we're screwed. Like we are so screwed. We're currently head in the sand with that, as far as like la 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 la, it's not going to happen. But if it does, it's yeah. And now we've finally gotten to the point where all the staff have to wear masks all the time. They do recommend in the shelter medicine thing too, that you try and time it so that if you have to be together for any period of time, you have to plan it so that they use lots of medical examples. So you're going to do a vaccination and you need somebody to restrain for you. You have everything ready. You have your animal. Everything's ready to go. Your second person comes in, you do it, you separate. That there's no standing next to each other and chatting, because we're going to be together for that period of time anyways. It's really trying to limit the time, trying to limit the volume of any sort of virus particle that you can get. Yeah, it's a really hard habit to break though, because you're used to just like, hey, how's it going? I'm sure Francis has wandered into Sandra's office and said, how? And Sandra's like, no, Sandra's got the door locked and nobody's coming in. But that habit though of doing that, right? Of just popping in to say hello, of, can you grab this for me? Can you pick this up? Can you lift it? Yeah. I started wearing a mask very early on, just because I crossed between 3 different jobs, and one of which is students, which, I mean, they're just little germ factories. And they all have families, and then, you know, it's like a huge thing. So, you know, people would wander in and I'd be working by myself, and then I pop my mask on and they, oh, like, no, this is to try and keep you healthy. Like, I don't want to spread anything. Like, ugh. But it's really just kind of, you know, starting to actually become the norm, unfortunately. Which, yeah, it's here for the next while. We just have to trudge through, unfortunately. Definitely check out the Ontario Shelter Medicine, though. They have a ton of stuff. They have infographics you can put up in your offices. They have infographics for staff and for public, for the, like, please don't get our staff sick sort of infographics.
The Ontario, what was that? Sorry.
So it's ontariosheltermedicine.org. They
Peter, what you'll eat, I guess.
They don't, we don't have a Canadian shelter medicine organization. They are pretty much it. But they're pretty darn huge, and they have, like, the COVID toolkit and the recovery options and as much information as you can possibly want. And they really are staying on top of, they have it updated with the last public health updates for what's recommended, what we're looking at. It is a little bit stricter because they are set in Ontario and they're just a giant petri dish. But a lot of it does apply to us and is pretty good. And they really outline the different aspects of, from a public health perspective, you know, where does mask wearing fall in, where does hand washing fall in, where does distance fall in, where does, you know, separating people out, where does actual isolation fall in, and why you have to do all of them to make it work, right? You can't just wash your hands and then sneeze on everybody. That's not going to work. They really have it nicely laid out, which is super nice. But shelters are unfortunately kind of in a weird gray zone because we are essential services, but we're also specialized staff, specialized volunteers. It's also not just, you can't just go to the Mediclinic down the street if your doctor's closed. You can't just go to, you know, the shelter down the street if yours is closed. Yeah, the big thing is the isolation. If we have a positive test, we're hooped.
Maybe what we could do is send out that sheet that you were doing on your PowerPoint with sources and resources to everyone.
Yeah, we can do that for sure.
Okay.
I can definitely do that. Actually, if you give me a second, I'll make it a PDF and I'll put it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
And then
while Meaghan is doing that, anybody think of any questions?
How is the situation in Estevan and Swift Current? I haven't really been following the news that closely about the number of cases, and are those considered, I'm assuming they're not considered hot spots?
We haven't had any cases down here as far as I know in Estevan. We're just considered the South, so I don't know.
It's a little vague, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If there was any in Estevan, we'd probably know by now, but so far, fingers crossed, but yeah.
Actually, Weyburn had signed up, but they didn't join us today. Kayla's from Swift Current. How is it? Any cases there?
So far we haven't, that I know of in Swift Current, but I do know in Maple Creek there was a little outbreak there. So it's been kind of, closer you get to Alberta, it seems that there's some there. So
okay.
Yeah, we've been careful.
Okay. So have you figured it out, Meaghan? If not, we can, you know, do it and just email it to everyone after.
that is true. Give me 1 second
Okay.
here.
So what we'll do is we'll get you that sheet with sources and resources, and if there aren't any further questions, Thank you, Megan, for a great presentation.